Hey, welcome back to another episode of the Question Guy podcast. Of course, my name is Dr. Keith McNally, and I've got two guests today. So I've got Brandon Ficara and I've got Mitch Gray. And today we're going to talk about culture. I bet you all thought I was going to say leadership. We did that last time with both of these people, but this time we're going to talk culture and specifically, and I wrote it down, high achievement culture. Now, there's a lot to talk about here because we are qualifying now what culture is, and then more specifically, high achievement. And so I do have some serious questions regarding this discussion topic. But before I go forward, just in case any of the audience doesn't know who either one of you are, and I think they should, please tell our audience who you are. Brandon, can we start with you?
Of course. Yeah. First of all, great to be back. This is a topic of mutual passion. I know for Mitch, we both devour each other's content on this subject, so it's pretty awesome to be here. Um, I work generally putting together sales teams for businesses big and small, and this is what we're talking about today is really my secret sauce to how I'm able to put together teams that not only do really well, but last a really long time doing really well. Um, I wrote a book, 90 Days of Failure and Some Success, about transitioning in sales career roles. I used to be a TV actor and a professional comedian. Now I'm a part-time comedian, and I don't have a TikTok.
Ah, well, I got to get your book now. You're probably the only guest who wrote a book that I don't have yet. So
That's an egregious failure on your part, Keith,
it
but
is. I got to go
we'll
get.
get it fixed.
I got to go get it now. I could get it on Amazon, right?
Yeah, anywhere
Okay.
books are sold.
As soon as this is over, that's where I'm going. Mitch, how about you? Who are you?
Hey, I'm realizing, Keith, I think I'm on the wrong call. So, no, we're here.
No, wait a second. Brandon's the comedian, not you. You are the straight face guy.
Well,
You're. It's like Abbott and
I've never,
Costello.
I've never
I
been
think
paid for it. I've never been paid for it. Brandon has tried to be paid for it. I've just never been paid for it. That's the signifying mark that makes him a real comedian and me a drugstore comedian or whatever gonna be. Um, yeah, Brandon and I from day one, gosh, I don't know. I guess we connected. I don't know what 10 months ago, maybe pushing a
yeah,
year. Time flies.
about.
Um, and really, from day one, we've kind of had that mutual passion, and the kind of the shared eagerness to really empower people, empower leaders, and help leaders build great teams. Um, if you read both of our content, 90% of the time we even use a lot of the same language. Kind of that 10% is Brandon's really focused on sales teams specifically. And I will say, as someone who's been around sales, gosh, I guess 30 years now that I think about it, I started in sales at 16 years old. So yeah, been in sales leadership since, 1998. So pushing 25 years. What I have to say about Brandon is his stuff is some of the best, and I'm not just saying that because he's on the horn right now. It really is some of the best. His strategies. What I hope for people like Brandon who have amazing content is that more people would pay attention to him. I can't tell you how many countless seminars and meetings I've sat in from sales and leadership gurus, and you're just sitting there the whole time going, really? Like, no, come on. You got to give me something better than that. That paid you far too. And then I meet people like Brandon who are, have amazing content, doing amazing things. And just more people in the world need to hear about folks like that. So I am a small business leadership consultant. I help business leaders build teams from the perspective of designing great culture, so that they can have clarity on who to hire and who to recruit that fit that culture. Back in 1998, I had a mentor tell me, if you get people on the right seat on the right bus, it changes everything. Later, I think Simon Sinek used the same analogy: right people, right bus, right seat. Basically, if you get people in the positions that make sense, where they can really perform at their best, so many of the other trivial issues that people turn into mountains kind of fix themselves. And what you see happen most of the time with leadership and with teams is they get all of that out of alignment. And so these issues that shouldn't be mountains, that should just be the small molehills that you can take a shovel and fix quickly, they do become mountains. And unfortunately for high performers and high achievers, they have the shortest patience tolerance of any of your employees, because high achievers aren't going to deal with the negativity, because they can move somewhere else. And so I know I'm digging into the water real quick, but that's kind of what I do. Same thing Brandon does. He just has that focus on sales. My current book is How to Hire and Keep Great People. I have 5 books that have been published. You can find it anywhere you buy books. I'm the creator and host of the Mitch Gray Show podcast, focuses on leadership. I've had both of you gentlemen on there. And so I'm excited for this topic. I'm just excited to see where it goes. And I really hope people pay attention, because there are some great things happening in the world. And the more you feed that positive energy, the more positive energy returns itself. And you can't duplicate anything else. Positive energy duplicates itself. Negative energy will never duplicate positive energy. And so I'm excited. Let's go.
Well, I don't know where to go now, because that was pretty much the podcast, and that was
All
good.
right,
so
we're
I appreciate
done.
it.
I told you.
Yeah, Mitch pretty much covered it. I think we're cool.
But so you brought up the whole idea of high achievers, and our topic was high achievement culture. So I guess we could start at that point, since you already brought it up. What's the difference of high achievers? Because now I'm thinking you're talking about specific people doing specific things for a specific reason, and high achievement culture, which is you're raising the bar for everybody on your team. So clarify that point for me, please. Or please, just please.
No, it's a great question and a great observation. More than a great question. Before you can have a high achieving team, you have to have a group of people who are high achievers. There is no chicken or the egg scenario here. It is almost impossible to create a high achieving team with a bunch of people who don't want to achieve highly. I mean, it's just kind of simple deductive reasoning, right?
But
and so
isn't that what the purpose of leadership is, to raise people
but
up?
Now we're talking aptitude.
Okay.
People bring something to the table long before leadership enters the picture.
Okay.
And so now we're talking what we're going to call aptitude, and that is someone's ability to bring their best self to the table every day without motivating factors. So it's someone that wakes up every day and goes, I'm bringing my best today, regardless of what happens around me. Those are the high achievers who say, I'm going to show up every single day. And in order to build a high achieving team, you need to gather as many of those high aptitude, high achievers as humanly possible. It's the same thing when we look at athletic sports. If we look at acting, if we look at anything of those kind of output generators, it's the idea of, I can take a bunch of people who call themselves average, and I will always get average, because their mindset is, I'm average at best. But if I take the people who are the Michael Jordans, the Tom Brady's, the greatest actors and actresses of all time, if I take, the Tim Cooks and the Bill Gates, the people that say, oh, no, I'm not average, I'm going to bring everything I have to the table every single day to push the envelope. When you can gather as many of those people to the table, all of a sudden you've naturally created a high achieving team. Now the role of the leader becomes the orchestrator. How does the orchestrator step in and organize the music so that it sounds its optimum best? So that calls for everyone organized, bringing their best to the table and playing a role on the team. And so that's why I always tell people when we're talking about hiring and recruiting, if you want to build a great team, you've got to start by hiring great people. So you've got to hire high aptitude people. If you don't hire high aptitude people, it's going to be very difficult to build a great team, because it's all a mindset. Zig Ziglar said it long ago. You are what you think you are. And far too often what we see with teams is they're hiring people who think they're average. And so the high achiever brings itself to the table as a high achiever, and then makes the decision to pour into a high achieving team.
Okay, so Brandon, So when I said we're looking at distinctively different things, high achieving people versus a high achievement culture, can you
Well,
get one without the other?
no, you
Okay.
can't because, and just to kind of back up a little bit, because everything Mitch said there, I agree with. The tuning fork is perfect resonance. Um, but to back up a little, kind of even before that,
Okay.
just to give a better definition for any listener who's still maybe unclear of like, well, wouldn't every culture be a high achieving culture then? Well, a culture that is comfortable to be in has nothing to do with achievement. Like we could have a great family dynamic where it's supportive and it's loving and it's all the good things you're going to want in any
So
great
you get the warm
culture,
and fuzzies.
but it has nothing to do with output. Once you
Okay.
bring output into the mix, that changes that dynamic and it requires a different mindset in putting it together and a different mindset in how you're going to lead it. Otherwise, like you said, well, couldn't I just stack the team and then it's a high achievement culture because we have high achievers? No, and there's evidence of this in a lot of I hate to always use sports analogies, but there's a lot of
We're
teams
gonna have to go
that
there.
put together the dream team, and then the team ends up not performing. And if you don't have the processes and the leadership cadence and the things that are necessary to help those high achievers, it's like filling a bag with an empty bottom, where they just fall right through, and you keep adding new people, and the people keep leaving. You have to create if you're putting these super talented fish in the tank, the pH balance has to be right, the water has to be right, all those little things. The little castle and the rocks have to be something that's appealing for them to be the high achievers that they are. If it isn't, they're going to find a new tank.
Well, well, then now you truly threw the question back at me, and I'm the question guy. The the chicken or the egg. So I'm really back there again. Initially you said, and maybe this was before the call, that you have to establish the culture in order to make anything work whatsoever. But then you just said, well, Mitch just said, you got to go find those people that are high achievers. So,
But the
Well,
team and the team and the culture is two different things.
okay.
yeah.
Culture always comes first because they
So
have to
you
be
do
able to
establish
step.
something. You do
They have
establish
to.
a, go
Yes,
ahead.
they have to step into something. The example Brandon gave is exactly right. If you take a bunch of all-star talent and
Mhm.
just bring them to a blank space, the one kind of necessary evil to a high achieving person is they are very autonomous. I've yet in my life to meet a high achieving person who is not autonomous. The necessary evil to that is they will create their own space. And you see that in sports often. And so if you bring these all-star caliber people to the table, but you don't have the perceived and the clarified boundaries of how we're going to function, when we're going to function, for what we're going to function, aka culture. By the way, Brandon, I just gave us a new definition for culture, evidently. If we don't have all of those clarified, these high aptitude, high achievers will create their own space. And that's when you can seemingly
Will they create
all of a sudden
individual
produce.
spaces or will they create their
Well,
unified
some yes
space?
and some no. But what
Okay.
we do create outside of all that is volatility. That's what we really create. And that volatility, a saying I like to use often is chaos is the enemy of success. That's what that volatility will create is chaos. So to answer your question, some of those high aptitude people will perform for themselves. Some of them will perform for the team. Either way, it's going to create chaos. And the people that are performing for the team and or themselves are all going to become very frustrated. And so that culture is element A, but element B, before you can build this non-proverbial team, you have to ensure you're bringing high caliber, high aptitude people to the table in order to build a high achieving team. So you're gonna set out to create a high achieving culture. This is who, what, when, where, how, why. Then you're going to bring in the human element of the high aptitude people. And from there, you begin orchestrating the pillars of a high aptitude team because Just saying we have a high aptitude culture that's healthy and empowering, and we have high aptitude caliber players, the end result doesn't magically become a high aptitude, high achieving team. That takes the element of orchestration and leadership. And that's that missing piece.
Okay.
And Keith, I think the point you kind of keep going back to, or with the chicken egg, is
Well,
it's
Mitch brought it up, and so I was just kind of tackling the idea.
yeah. But I think that there's a piece to it that you can't have a culture alone, right?
Yes.
So the idea of like, well, how do you have the culture, or do you bring in people who are just great? And it's like, well, you can have a concept of a culture, and you can have the guidelines and the intention of the culture, but until there's a second breath and heartbeat in the room, you can't start the building process of a culture. So it isn't, you can't just build a culture and then add people. You can have the concept of the culture, and then as you add the people, you build the culture.
And then there was culture.
Yeah.
And then there was go.
So maybe that, I don't know if that helps at all, but I think
Actually,
that's a good
that
way to
kind
look
of
at it.
just confused me more because
Damn it.
only because we talked and because I have a lot of conversations with Mitch and that design, the idea of what you want to achieve and why you want to achieve it should be, he made it, he literally said that's A, and that's A right there. And then you bring in the high achievement people, the team, which is B, and then C, and then we got C, now we got a triangle. And so now we got an upside down triangle because Mitch likes upside down triangles.
Correct.
And that's from a previous conversation. So now we've got the orchestrator at the bottom holding up the culture and the team. They're orchestrating from the bottom. So I'm kind of, getting the idea. But before I go into all of that, we've now looked at culture definition. What is high achievement culture? Can we clarify the definition? Can we clarify what
Yeah.
that
So
like?
I'll jump in on this one, Mitch, and certainly correct or fill in as needed. So the difference of a high achievement culture or a high performance culture, um, the what you have to do to build that culture is you're creating a culture that allows for sustained excellent results, right? So
No, I wrote that
anybody,
word down earlier because we need to talk about sustainability.
yeah. Well, that's the to me one of the biggest responsibilities of a culture is to create sustainability, because anybody, you can work in, I've had some sales jobs that were like boiler room kind of things. Anybody can get some success. Anybody can have a great week, a great month, a great year. But to be able to have a repeatable result time and time again, that's where that comes from the culture. And so you have to build it in a way where you get top performance, where your performers are not working beyond 100% of their capabilities. Otherwise, you'll get top performance for a while, and then everybody burns out. You always hear about burnout, especially in my world in sales.
Mhm.
And the way you avoid burnout is by not overtaxing your people, but finding a way to get the highest amount of, finding that threshold to where, look, I can get 10 sales up to 99% of my ability and energy. I can push it to 105 for a little while and get you 11, but the next week I'm going to get you 3, right? I don't ever want to see you go to 100. I want you to be at 99 and maintain that, because then I'll have 20 deals after 2 weeks rather than 14. And it's that kind of mentality of, and especially in a production, the sales is great for this discussion. Every meeting I ever went into as a sales leader with like the C-suite or whoever else, it's just like, well, let's beat on the sales machine and beat on the sales machine, more sales, more sales. And that's the only, speed that the C-suite generally has, because they're not thinking about sustainability. So it's my job as a leader to say, look, at our current capacity and our marketing efforts and everything else, this is as good as we can expect to do. And this is why it's really good. And here's what our numbers are, yada, yada. But we can push it beyond this, but then we're going to start to suffer. We're going to show wear around the edges, and sooner or later we're going to be looking for new top salespeople, because as much money as they're making here, they can't keep it up, and they're stressed out, and their lives are not enjoyable because of their job, which should never be the case.
Mitch.
Amen.
Amen.
Yeah, let's.
And it was really about how we clearly defining high achievement culture.
Yeah.
What are the pieces that go into play?
So my initial response to that is very much echoing what Brandon just said. I was actually going to use the word capacity as well,
Okay.
because the idea is, in a high achieving culture, what we've done is we've created a space where everyone can work at capacity every day. Now, here's the catch to that statement. Everyone can work at capacity every day. That capacity fluctuates. And that's a little bit what Brandon is alluding to there. It's impossible for a human to give the same effort every single day, because elements change. Drama at home happens. People pass on. Sickness shows up at your doorstep. Exuberance comes out one day, and you all of a sudden can hit that 10 cell mark. What we're talking about is building a safe culture and an empowering culture that invites consistency, resilience, diligence, rather than going full bore every single day, because it just doesn't work that way, especially when you're talking about dealing with high aptitude performers. They're naturally bringing a self-imposed pressure to the table that says, I am going to outwork, outperform, and outdo what I did yesterday. Mm. And that can easily become a very unhealthy, self-destructive attitude. Again, it's a necessary evil, though. We want that attitude because that's the nature of high aptitude people. But what we have to coach and support, and this is what our culture, the role it plays, is, look, Brandon, it's okay if today isn't as good as yesterday. What matters most is that you show up as your best self today. What is your capacity today? Yesterday's gone. Don't give tomorrow the energy today deserves. What's your capacity today? And when we design a high achieving culture from that perspective, we're going to empower the best in you today, this moment. Then all of a sudden that sustainability starts becoming a byproduct of safety, permission, and engagement. Because now the only role that a leader is playing is the role of, again, conductor, kind of saying, okay, Brandon, where are you at today? Let's be realistic. I want realism in performance over some fake, inauthentic, well, I think I can hit 12 cells today. Okay, let's back that train up a little bit and get real, because that is not sustainable. So when we look at it from that perspective, we are developing a culture that is empowering, engaging, it's interactive, but it also gives permission for someone to say, hey, Brandon, I got to be honest with you today, brother. I'm only going to hit 7 because I was up all night with my 2-year-old last night. And that's the type of culture, that permissive culture, that we need to have, that realism. And the reason I want to kind of remove the cells from it for a second is because this culture is industry-wide. There is no one industry that this culture works in. You can apply it to sales. You can apply it to Fortune 500. The sandwich shop down the street can apply the same culture, same principles, same steps to build. The nonprofit, the church, the government agency, the schools, everyone can apply and implement this type of culture using the same systems and strategies. All you're doing is decide. The only deciding factors in the differentiator is, how do you view performance? Is performance raising money for my nonprofit, or is performance teaching in the classroom? Is performance selling 20 Cadillacs this week, or is performance making the best sandwiches on the street? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Culture is culture. And so when we talk about high achieving culture, it is applicable across the board. It's agnostic to industry. No ifs, ands, or buts.
Absolutely. And what it comes down to is, if you're this is where metrics and data kind of come into the fold and can really help your culture to be a high achievement culture, is really, like we all should be doing, and we know instinctually that we all think we should be just doing a little bit better each day and just really trying to continually improve. If whatever industry you're in, if your output is at X, right, then I don't need you to be, 3 times as good as that. What I need you to do is to show when I look month over month, I want to see that improving, and you're going to plateau at some point. You hit that point where if it's not sustainable to do more, and it's hard sometimes for a leader to accept that,
Mm.
to accept that while there's still improvement, there might not be a discernible uptick in the output, and that's okay. Once somebody's as good as they're going to get, if that level is excellent, then I'll take that all day. And it's hard sometimes for a leader who constantly wants to show we're doing better, we're doing better. It's like, but that's not always sustainable on the individual level or on the team level. Rarely do you have a team that's hit like, full enlightenment, just because people move and things change. But I've definitely seen individuals who get to a point where they're great, and that's not to say they don't have spikes still of but when you look at their overall numbers 2 years in a row, you see that, roughly they're at a plateau, but that's a really high plateau. I am fine with that, and it requires discipline, from the leader, to not try to ratchet that person up even more, because sooner or later, you're going to push them into the abyss as you push them too hard. So it requires that self reflection and that, maturity, really, as a leader, to know, okay, I don't think there's anything else in this well. I think this person is kicking ass every day, day in, day out, year in, year out, and I'm happy with that. Now my job changes with that person to now I'm here to make sure I'm just worried about that sustainability. So if I start to see a dip, I check in on their energy level, see what's going on at home, make sure they're not working too hard or trying, then it just comes down to maintenance. And when you get, when you're building that high, achievement culture, it's important to understand that you as a leader has a different role for each one of your people. Some of them are learning. Some of them are, I mean, everybody should be learning, at all times, but some of them are heavily, these are your kind of project players who aren't high achievers yet, but you know that they have it in them. Some are in that kind of taking that next step, going from good to great, and then some it's sustaining great, and it's a whole different mindset with each experience level, I guess you'd call it, to make sure that you're delivering what this person needs to be sustainable, what this person needs to make those little fine tweaks that make huge gains over the long term, and help this, this learning person. We need to help them get all the basics, and we're working on fundamentals and blocking and tackling with them. And if you always have that mindset, that's how you can, build it essentially. And then you have to be able to recognize when somebody crosses over into that next group so that you change your approach with them.
Yeah.
Well, you just took the question away from me, because that is
We are the answer guys, Keith. We're the answer guys.
Yeah, you just we're a step ahead. You could just sit there. Well, we know what your next 3 questions are as well.
Well, let me ask the question then. The third point of the triangle was the orchestrator, the leader. And so both of you have begun talking about the action items of the leader. What type of person is this person? How do you be a leader, a coach, a cheerleader, a mentor, and a teacher to high performing people? That's a unique individual.
It is. Phil Jackson would be a
Yeah.
great example, right?
Yeah.
Whoa,
I think-
okay. Well, I need to get him. Can we get him on the call? Is he
Yeah, right.
available?
No, he's not available.
I
I've
think
tried.
the 2 words.
Oh,
think
okay.
the
I
two
was about
words
to
that
say,
come-
because I'm going to test you on
Yeah.
that one. If I can get him before you can.
No, he's not available. If you don't know Phil Jackson's not available.
He's basketball.
He's just
Is
not.
he dead?
No, he's not dead.
Then he's available.
Also
He's
not
just better
available.
than us. But Mitch, what do you think?
The 2 words the first 2 words that come to mind when you pose that question, Keith, are number 1, humility. Because really in that position, and Brandon so eloquently kind of painted the picture of the role of really what's taking shape every day.
Mm-hmm.
That position leaves zero room for ego within the leader, because that leader has to be ready and able to adapt, to maneuver, to shift language. It's just it is an art form to go from Brandon, the 20-year veteran, and finding out the language and the touch points that help him feel supported, and then go to Keith, the second week salesperson, and find the touch
Still high
points and
performer.
the still a high performer, yes, but that fundamental, that is an art form, because you cannot speak the same language to those two people. They are so far on opposite ends of the spectrum, and then you have all the people in between. So humility to me is the first element. The second element is open-mindedness, because of the picture I just painted. That leader has to be able to go, okay, here's Brandon. How can I best communicate with him? Not in the way I think is best, but in the way that Brandon has showed me is best. That takes an open-minded approach to really be aware, to be self-aware, also outwardly aware, to be listening and always taking note. Hey, Brandon mentions sports all the time, so I know a part of the language I can use with him is sports. Well, Keith never mentioned sports, never played sports, doesn't know anything of, so I can't use that language. And I actually learned that personally. I remember in my early leadership days in sales, actually, it was a female assistant manager that came to me and said, Mitch, you have to stop talking about sports analogies, because
That was told to you?
Yeah, told to me. Yeah, but like to my, in a polite way. But she's like, you have to stop using sports analogies. I'm like, but I love sports. And she's like, yeah, but there's half the team that doesn't, and we don't get it.
Oh.
Like, you walk away thinking you said something so clever, and we're just like, we have no idea what he's talking about. And so that was a mistake on my part to again, the phrase I use, leading from assumption. I assumed that everyone loved sports and got it. Guess what? 80% of the population doesn't, and that's okay. So as an open-minded, humble leader, I have to learn the language of everyone within my sphere of influence. And that takes a lot of work. So what does that do with ego? Well, it moves the leader's ego to the side and says, I'm going to figure out everyone's touch point within their humanity, their life experience, so that I can really communicate, going full circle, the culture that we've implemented here, and so that they have a fair chance to honor that culture. See, what I think happens oftentimes is there actually is a healthy culture, but it's not communicated in the language that allows people the permission to honor the culture. And so now we've missed the whole boat. And so to me, humility and open-mindedness are critical in that leader.
Yeah, to talk about the humility, and that's absolutely the first thing for me. Another thing, two things you mentioned, I want to kind of connect them. You'd mentioned earlier that high performers are a little unique in that they will prepare in their own way, they will execute in their own way. If you have processes, it's not that they won't follow a process that works and is simple, but generally they're going to have alterations to the process for their own comfort, because they're high performers. They know what they need to be successful. So if you're a manager or a leader with a high amount of ego coming into it, it's going to be really hard for you to watch all of the processes that you did all the backbreaking work to build, and watch people just doing their own thing with it, and knowing the difference between, like, no, you have to do it that way because it screws up other things, or no, actually you can do that different if you're more comfortable that way, because you're getting the same result. It really doesn't matter. And so having that level of humility to allow people to have that space that Mitch talked about, and allow them to do it the way that they're going to do it best, and respect their process. Very hard for a leader who's doesn't have a high level of humility, for sure.
So if I can't get in touch with, what you said, Phil Jackson,
Yeah.
who should I be getting in touch with?
Us.
Oh,
Yeah, we're kind of it.
you guys are already on the call.
No,
Well,
but it doesn't
take advantage
matter.
of it.
We're here. Us.
But as far as, like, I mean, if you're looking for examples of the personality type, it's number one, it has to be somebody who's a high achiever as well. Because it's a different
Can I
mindset.
ask a question?
Yeah.
My first my first show in season 2, Mitch and I talked about, what is a leader? What is leadership? To define it. Only because what came up in social media was the distinction between, because Mitch and I, when I talked to Mitch about leaders and leadership, he never mentions theory academics. He never did. And so we talked about, why he doesn't do that. And I've got a PhD, I've got a PhD in education, and that's part of my training. My academic training is to identify how to approach leadership and leading people from a methodical process, right? And,
Sure.
and when we and one of those theories is big person theory or big man, I forget now what it's called, naturally born people stepping into the role of what they're naturally born to do is to lead. Um, when we talk about high achievement leaders who run high achievement cultures, and again, I'm using words very specifically, and leaders who lead high achieving people, are they natural at this, or is it something that you can learn to do? And that was really my question. That was my question. That is my question.
Will it be your question as well?
It is my question now.
I don't think
Only
so.
because, no?
And I'd be interested to hear Mitch's thoughts on this. My personal thought is that it really, if you now having a natural inclination makes it easier, right?
Mhm.
But I think that talent, especially in leadership, is a much smaller piece of it. Being that natural born leader, number one, it's usually you're misidentifying somebody who's busted their hump to become a great leader. But I think it can be learned with desire. I think that sometimes when you have to go through that process, when you don't have the natural gifts, I think the that learning process is what makes you a great leader for a high achievement team, because you had to achieve at a high level because your talent level wasn't high. Whereas if you're the natural born leader, a lot of times you have trouble identifying with a high achievement team because you're just you're treading water at your natural talent ability. You're not really, even if you're good at it, you might be a better leader for a team of uh, middle performers. I don't know, Mitch. What do you think? I don't know if any of that made sense.
Keith is going to know this is my answer often. The answer for me is yes.
I was going to say it depends. Okay.
But yeah, well, it does because they aren't proposed in exclusivity. In other words, you have some leaders that are kind of they have some intuitions that they don't even ask. It's just there. I mean, it just is, and that's again industry wide in all professions. But on the flip side of that coin, you also have some great leaders who, what I like to call, earned their way. That's the picture that Brandon just painted.
Is
They
it
kind of
still
they
applicable to high achievement teams,
Oh,
though?
100%,
Oh,
100% it is.
okay.
You have leaders who are kind of naturally gifted and have this intuition that they can't control, who become great leaders for high achievement teams. But you also have people who kind of earn their scars. They had to go through it. They had to get their lumps. And so the answer is yes. Conversely, you can also have really poor leaders who have natural abilities but don't understand how to capitalize on those. And you can also have poor leaders who've earned their lumps, but maybe were promoted just because they were a great performer. But and that was kind of where I was going to pull the thread, piggybacking off of what Brandon said. Really, the major mistake that I see most organizations make is they promote people just because they're a high performance person. In other words, let's go back to our sales analogy. They're the top salesperson, and so they get promoted into leadership. The problem with that is, in my experience, I've rarely seen the best performers become the best leaders. And you see that in sports all the time.
And I
You look
think
at
not too long ago, Brandon, didn't you write a LinkedIn post that touched on that? something to that effect rather
I think,
recently. Yeah.
or I commented on something, but
Yeah.
yeah, I'm with you on this. I do think it's just two different skills though, and so
Yes.
you can absolutely be a top performer and be also a top leader, but it's like
Yes.
saying, well, you're the best ballerina, so we're going to promote you to be a truck driver. It's like, well, you might be the best ballerina and the best truck driver
But it's not
for
related
sure,
to your
but it's not
ballerinaness that you're a
related.
good driver.
Yeah, because
Yes.
you're a great ballerina will not impact how good of a truck driver you are, and
I mean,
that's
it
what I
could
think
impact
people
your foot. It
miss.
could impact your footwork. It could give them better footwork.
You would
Well,
have a
the
leg
reason
up
I,
with
I
you.
reason I
You would
added
have
that is
like,
the reason I added that is because historically speaking, in technical fields where I come from, IT and technical fields, a good technician, regardless of where you are in that, in that schema, don't necessarily make the best tech managers. Being good
well,
at
and
something
that's
tech,
kind of, and that kind of goes back to what Brandon said. Really, the word I want to use to encapsulate what he was saying earlier is relatability.
okay,
So oftentimes you have people that come in with these innate skills, and there can be a disconnect because they kind of look at the other people and go, "Why aren't you getting it?" And again, I know we said we aren't going to use sports analogies all the time, but I'm going to use another one. To me, the greatest epitome of that was Michael Jordan, the great basketball player, arguably the greatest of all time. He was so hard on his teammates. That was a downside to Michael Jordan, is he was almost abusive to his teammates because he was so great with God-given ability that he would look at his teammates and go, what are you doing? And his teammates were like, I'm just out here trying my best, man. Like, I don't get it. And so that's what can happen with people that have these kind of high God gifted abilities, is they're disconnected with many of the people that are kind of having to do the grunt work to get to those points in life. But conversely, what can also happen, and I've seen this, is those people that kind of had to work their way to the top, they may be a really great leader. They can all of a sudden have a disconnect to someone who is kind of innately gifted.
Yeah.
And so the whole point of this conversation is about relatability. And we always say it's relationships first, it's people first. That's why when you ask us the elements of a great leader, both of us said humility. Because what's going to allow either that innately gifted leader or that kind of grunt work leader, regardless of their disposition, what's going to open the door for them to become even more great at their leadership is humility. It doesn't matter how I showed up. What matters is how I empower others around me to show up. And that has no judgment. In other words, whether you're an innate leader or the leader that worked their way up, ego has no judgment, but neither does humility. And so both of those have to have humility to go, look, I don't understand why they don't get it, but that doesn't matter. Or I don't understand how they can naturally perform that way, but that doesn't matter. What matters in this moment in time is I set myself aside and I say, how can I best help you? That's I teach leaders that question constantly. The number one question you should be asking your people every single day is, how can I help you? What can I do to help prepare you better? What can I do for you today? If you do those things, you'll quickly realize you're eating humble pie, and it's the best tasting pie you can have because it's going to empower your people to a level that you can't even imagine.
Yeah. And I find that sometimes when I'm asking, how can I help you or what can I do for you? The more low maintenance performers
Yes.
will tend to be like, no, everything's great, boss. No, we're
Yes.
great. So I find asking, what's the least comfortable thing in your world right
Yeah.
now? Like that to me
that's a
is
good
that
question.
and it's most of my coaching sprouts from that question. And because it starts with, well, when I'm talking to a person about this, I don't know exactly where to go, and whatever it might be. But that usually leads to, okay, well, then what, like the old thing of just kind of, then you just keep ask why 3 more times. And now you have somebody, weeping in tears about how they are poor at conflict resolution because of, an overbearing sibling.
Oh
And
gosh.
but it's the truth, like
Yeah,
it's that
yeah.
kind of.
Yep.
But I find that question, especially to high achievers who want to always act like they've got it right, whatever it might be. If you say, what's the least comfortable thing for you right now, or where are you experiencing discomfort, I go that way, not to be negative in my question, but I find that I usually will get a, well, since you asked, Whereas if I ask the positive side of like, what can I help you with? It's get out of my way is usually the high achievers mantra to that question. But I've had some success with that for sure.
Good, good. Well, we've touched on high achievers, people, the high achievement culture, that area in which they work, and then we touched on leaders of high achieving people and creating that high achievement culture. Gentlemen, thank you so much for this conversation. Before we, tap out of this conversation, any final words for the audience? A summary, 30 seconds or less from either of
Um,
you?
yeah, I can jump in. And this is going to be slightly controversial, but I've found, especially with high achievement teams, now again, I'm coming from sales.
Sure.
The two things that are crucial to really kind of unlocking the full potential is number one, consistent acknowledgement. I find that high achievers do well and they want it to be recognized, as we all do to some level, but I feel like just like a little bit more for high achievers. And then this is the controversial part: is as a leader, I believe in the philosophy of leading with love, meaning that if you show your high achievers that you actually love them as human beings, um, I believe that sets the bar and sets the level of trust where it needs to be for them to give that consistent effort, knowing that they're in the right hands and that they can go full speed because they don't have to look over their shoulder.
Wow.
I thought it was going to be controversial. I'm like, that's money, man.
Well, when you
That's take it
mention
to the
love,
bank every time. Yeah.
HR department buttholes pucker up immediately
I'm
when you talk
and
about
I'm the
loving
guy.
people.
I'm the guy that the first chapter of my book is spirituality in the workplace, so I'm all about it.
Nice.
You know that.
This is why we're both unemployable, Mitch.
That's right. Speaking of unemployable, I'll give my 30 seconds, Phil, and that is the other great thing about high achievers that we said before is they're autonomous. And so my take on that is empower the autonomy. And really, to me, the open door to doing that is reflection. For me, Brandon, kind of piggybacking on what you said, the reason high achievers need that validation more and need that kind of affirmation of love and support is because oftentimes high achievers are also the most self-judgmental people because they have in their mind a place that they want to go, and getting anything less is failure. And so oftentimes on the outset, people are like, wow, that's a high achieving person. But what's motivating that is usually a fear of not meeting self-imposed expectation.
Yep.
And so that self-reflection and empowering that autonomy is a really strong way to combat kind of that self-destructive internal language that oftentimes the most high achievers among us are speaking to themselves a lot harshly than they do others. So yeah, I love it.
Great point. Wow.
Well, thank you. Thank you both. And again, Brandon, Mitch, thank you for joining me in conversation on the Question Guy podcast, season 2. Hopefully we'll see you next time. Take care.
Still on the wrong call.
Thanks, everybody. This was awesome.